A number of government announcements over the last 2 weeks in relation to the property market and the housing sector. Some of them welcome for landlords, some of them not so welcome, unfortunately. So we've had announcements from the government around what's going to happen with housing benefits and the budget for social housing in the UK going into 2021. Now, there were some announcements as well, short term, that are quite beneficial to landlords, with an extension to the furlough scheme, also some extensions around business bounce back loans and coronavirus business interruption loan applications to make sure there's still some support for businesses, to make sure there's still support for workers and the self-employed to help cushion incomes through a second lockdown in England. And also we've got to remember that while Wales and Scotland aren't in the second lockdown situation that England is, Wales quite recently has been in a tighter lockdown than England. Scotland has been relaxing but also increasing restrictions in line with what's going on in the ground with coronavirus cases there. So we are still very much in a very changeable marketplace. What the Chancellor has announced is what's going to happen in April next year. And for those with a lot of properties let to social housing tenants, this probably won't be welcome news. There are big concerns in the industry about potential affordability. That's because they're going to freeze housing benefit levels for next year to the levels from April 2020 of this year. Now, there has been some enhanced support for people on benefits as a result of the coronavirus crisis. They've also announced that that enhanced support will come to an end as well. So there's concern that they may create an affordability issue. Now, we've got to remember this comes against the backdrop of private sector rents being in very, very strong growth territory over the last 3 or 4 months as a result of a bounce post-lockdowns across the UK. So there's a concern that private rents are doing this. If social housing rents are capped at a lower level here, it may become even less affordable for social housing tenants to be in good quality rental accommodation. That said, for those who do have social housing tenants in their properties, we know that rents are set against the bottom third of rents in the marketplace, and generally they're updated every year in April of each year. There was, in most regions around the UK, a big uplift in April of this year because of what was going on with private sector rents immediately post the lockdown situation. And so we're actually not coming off that bad a base in terms of a freeze for a lot of regions in the UK. We also know that social housing tenants generally tend to stay longer in properties. You've got more stability. So a lot of landlords are slower to raise the rents for social housing tenants as well. So it's not all doom and gloom, but just bear in mind if you were expecting to raise the rents in line with a government increase in April next year, that won't be a possibility. In better news for landlords, those considering energy improvement measures to properties within their rental portfolio, and this is definitely something that the government is encouraging and they're supporting this, the Green Homes Grant, which is grants of up to $5,000, where the government will pay 2/3 of the cost of energy efficiency measures to upgrade properties to bring them up to a better standard. That's been extended for another 12 months. So it was due to end in March 2021. It's now been extended to March 2022. Now that was after fairly heavy criticism that the scheme was introduced in a rushed way and a lot of people weren't ready for the start of the scheme when it went live earlier on this year. There's also significant lead times in terms of getting payment from the scheme, but we also think about some of the energy saving measures. The legacy of the coronavirus crisis worldwide has been a big slowdown and bottleneck in terms of manufacturing times. So a lot of the energy improvement measures that are talked about in the scheme, there's big delays. Double glazing at the moment in most parts of the country subject to a 2-month to a 3-month delay, whereas previously you could have ordered double glazing and had it ready in 2 to 3 weeks. Similar delays in lots of other efficiency measures like the materials required for external wall insulation, upgrading internal insulation, and also some of the technology related to more energy efficient heating systems as well. So this is welcome news that the government has extended the window for the Green Homes Grant. If you do have properties within your portfolio, especially with single glazing, older build properties that may not have the ability to have cavity wall insulation or weren't built with internal wall insulation, then consider whether you could use this grant for external wall insulation, and also keep an eye on what's going on with new generation heating systems as well. At this stage right now, ground source, air source heat pumps are still, over a 15 to 20 year lifespan, much less affordable than a gas central heating system, but prices are coming down. And remember that the government has set a target for gas to not be fitted in any new build properties from 2025 as part of their carbon reduction targets. So there's a bet with a lot of the big housing developers having to move to electric and renewable energy sources. The cost per unit of some of these sources is likely to come down over the next few years. And it's very likely that while they're starting with new properties, there will also be a big push for older properties to come in line with those new regulations. At the moment, you've got a requirement for properties to meet an E rating in England and Wales before they can be let out. For Scotland, it's got to be a D rating or higher. And it's likely that over the next couple of years, we'll see that come into nationally a D rating, maybe even a C rating. So look for these opportunities where you can get subsidised energy improvements in your portfolio as they come up. Now, the other news that came out is around possession cases. And this is fairly unwelcome news for landlords who may have problem tenants in their properties. We remember one of the first things that came out in relation to possessions was, as a result of the coronavirus rules, possession timelines were significantly increased. There was firstly a hold put on possession cases with the court, and then the notice periods were extended by a significant amount. The first change was all notices went to 2-month notices, effectively the same as Section 21. In August of this year, the government effectively moved the goalpost to pretty much all notices to reclaim possession of a property are now 6-month notices as well. Once the courts did restart, they're dealing with the backlog of possession claims that were in place prior to the first lockdown across the UK. Well, the kicker now for a lot of landlords is the current possession rules stay in place until March next year, meaning a tenant has to build up 6 months worth of rent arrears before you can serve them an eviction notice. But also what they've said is they will not hear possession cases in the courts until after the 11th of January if the tenant has built up arrears during the period from the first COVID lockdown to today. So basically, the only possession cases that can be brought to the courts at the moment in England and Wales, and similar legislation in Scotland with housing tribunals, the only cases that can be brought to effectively have a judgment made on them at the moment are those that relate to arrears that built up pre-COVID. So how as a landlord do you cope with this at the moment? Well, the key thing here is a good lettings agent and communication. At this stage, given the landscape at the moment, it's unlikely, even if a tenant was in serious arrears, that you can get them out very quickly. So you're better off at this point in time to agree a payment plan to make sure that the tenant understands that at some point they will need to pay this money back, and work proactively with your lettings agent to make sure the tenant is paying what they can afford to pay. The good news overall is the majority of landlords are reporting that most tenants aren't going into rent arrears. The biggest issue with rent arrears is around high rental value properties in London and in the southeast of the country. And that's down to those being the least affordable rents in the midst of a coronavirus crisis. However, a lot of the rest of the country is holding up fairly well in terms of tenants continuing to pay, in terms of tenants being in a position to maintain payments because of the government support measures in place, and even where landlords are having to agree payment plans, the majority of tenants are not significantly behind at this stage. So hopefully we manage to get out of this crisis without too much heartache for tenants or for landlords. But do make sure that you're working in a collaborative way if tenants are getting into difficulty, because at the moment you're much better off keeping a tenant in the property with a payment plan in place than going legal on them at this stage. It will be a very long, protracted and difficult process, and there's definitely not the political or legal will behind landlords putting tenants out onto the street at this particular point in time.